So they can say they want to support, they want to speak.
Got any more of them?
Or
The agenda? Who wants that? Yes.
Wait one more minute if that's all right. I wait one more minute. For you folks that didn't pick up half the agenda, Jennifer's making some additional copies and she'll here. Oh, I can do that right. We need a copy of the agenda.
Next Google? Oh, for me, one second.
You got his already.
Oh, there you go. Just make it for me. Thank you.
Anybody else? There you go, Stephanie.
Sure.
Start recording when I talk.
I already did.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tim Janacek, the Chair of the Plan Commission. These are all our Plan Commission members, and we have our Deputy Clerk, Stephanie Goff, who's going to take everything down for us. And we have a guest, Brian Standing from Dane County, who's going to talk authoritatively on what the Plan Commission is working on in terms of the comprehensive plan for the town. We have a couple of business items that take place before we get to probably the subject that most of you folks are here. So if you just stand by while we get our business out of the way, we will get to the presentation by Brian Standing as soon as possible. All right, I'll call the meeting to order.
Wow.
May I have a roll call, please?
Tim Janacek,
Here.
Sharon Christensen.
Here.
Arlen Kai,
Here.
Dave Hageman,
Here.
Chuck Swell,
Here.
Gina Larson. Here. Jessica Berman.
We've provided you with copies of last month's minutes, 2 months ago, pardon me, 2 months ago, which was our most recent meeting. Is there a motion to approve? Motion. Second. Okay, motion been made second to approve the minutes from the March meeting. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Minutes are approved. Item number 4 on our agenda relates to a parcel of property where our town resident, Gary Jensen, is the applicant. Ms. Clerk, you got a statement to make about that?
Yep, I sure will. So currently the board is in the process of discussing on May 31st to go over the developer's agreement that's pertaining to the extension of Windridge Road to allow the proper access to the 2 approved lots. It's not ready for recommendation yet. And the town's attorney has made comments on the developer's agreement as well as the engineering contracts that we've received so many have not been signed.
So we're not ready for item number 4.
Correct. And then when we are ready, it would be wonderful if we could do a site visit after the agreement is finalized. Not maybe not accepted, but
Site agreement with members of the commission can attend.
yes, exactly.
That sounds like a good idea to everybody?
Is that anything to add?
if they have an inspection. Site inspection.
Yep.
Sometime.
Yep.
When there's a.
After the.
Okay. Scheduling to be determined.
Yes.
But we can do that. All right, thank you. Item 5 on the agenda, folks, is presentation and public input regarding transfer of development rights, as you will hear it referred to tonight, TBR, within the draft comprehensive plan that the town has been working on. For our presenter, I'm going to call upon Brian Standing from Dane County, who's been working with us closely for a long time and has the details to understand transfer of development. Folks, if you want to be able to see this, your chair into this aisle over here for sure. While we're getting set up, this is an important issue to our town because up until now, we have not had a transfer of development rights procedure in our town plan. So this will be entirely new, and Brian Standing will be the guy to best explain this stuff.
Yeah, so I wanted to just start a little bit by talking about what the comprehensive plan is, and then we can get into some of the details of the development line. So the comprehensive plan is the guide for zoning, rezoning, conditional use permit, and land division activities in the town of Oregon. It's part of the Dane County comprehensive plan. And what I've been working with the town plan commission now for a couple of years now on doing an update in the redraft of the town's current plan to modernize it and bring it into consistency with what other communities are doing and state comprehensive planning law. So this is what I'm going to be talking off of here is all available on the web. So all this information, if you want to find it after this meeting, it's all available at some of these links. If people prefer printed copies of things, there's some contact information here. May not be able to see it because I'm screen sharing at the moment. But there's a link here with an email address that would go to myself and Stephanie and Jennifer here at the town. And so certainly we can answer questions after that. So there's a lot of, the way the plan basically works is it divides the town up into a couple different categories. And then there's different policies that apply in each of those categories. When we at our next meeting, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about legacy parcels and what's the other item on that agenda? Density. Thank you. Today, we're going to be talking about two major issues. We're going to be talking about transfer of development rights and commercial development. So let me just start by talking about sort of what the concept of transfer of development rights is, and then I'll get into some of the text. So as most of you, I think, know, the town for a long time has established a policy of one density unit or development right for 35 acres in much of the town, in most of the town. And that's how it sort of caps the total amount of development, non-farm development that can occur on a particular property based on a unit for every 35 acres that people owned back in 1994, which is when the town first adopted that policy. So what a transfer of development rights program would do is it would say to folks who are under that system, if you wish to, and you don't want to develop on your own property, you can basically own that development right, take it off the property and sell it to somebody else who will use it to develop somewhere else in the town where the town wants to encourage development. It's a private transaction between two private individuals. So they negotiate their own price, what they think that is worth. And we'll go into the details of how that gets tracked and recorded. The basically gives the sending area, sending the relation of that. It gives them the ability to realize some money, some dollar value for that right, and yet without having a house. And in the area he's getting the right, receiving area, then an opportunity to develop more than they could under the existing plan. And so part of the idea that sort of spreads the wealth a little bit, right? So if under a normal development scenario, if we drew a line on the map and said, okay, these people can develop and these people can't, then the person who's in the developing area, they get a big windfall, right, of money. And the person in the area where they can't develop doesn't get anything from that same transaction. So what part of what TDR is intended to do is to sort of spread the wealth a little bit, right? So that, you know, the person who's doing the development doesn't get all of that increase in the property value they get from selling a lot. And the person in the sending area gets an opportunity to realize some of that value that they have in the land, especially if they're not particularly interested in development. Right? So that's the sort of concept. So in the draft plan, and can everyone see this okay, or should I zoom in a little? Zoom in. Zoom in. Figure out how to do that.
For those of us elderly in the audience, Zoom.
How's this? Is that better? Okay. So this is sort of, you know, this language sort of talks about what, you know, what I just talked about with you is this is sort of how, you know, what a TDR works. Dane County has a segment in our zoning ordinance that helps facilitate this. So what it does is it helps identify areas that we send development rights and areas that we receive them. And it also helps track how those transactions take place so that you don't double count, right? So that someone doesn't sell a right and then turn around and, you know, get a density study or something and develop. And we need to know that that right is taken from that property. So the zoning ordinance ties into that. And so the objectives that this is trying to do, there's a reason why the town wants to do this. And first is preserve farmland and rural character. This is something that in the opinion surveys the town has done has ranked very highly among town residents on both of these issues. Redirecting non-farm development away from productive agricultural lands. So if you've got farmland with really good soils, maybe that's not the best place to put a house, and maybe we should be looking somewhere else in the town. Encourage permanent protection of large blocks of contiguous farmland. If we're going to protect farming and farming activities, those having lots of area of farmland together is really important. Encouraging permanent protection of regionally significant natural resource, environmental, and recreational lands. A lot of what we're talking about here is protection of farmland, but this technique can also be used for things like wetlands or prairie remnants or other resources that you would rather keep in their natural state rather than build on. Allow farmers for reasonable compensation for their land. Direct development to more suitable areas where development can be more efficiently served. So you already have existing town roads. And so instead of having to build a new road, you can put the development there. Develop it at higher densities and to encourage infill development. So the first question is, well, how many people how do we know how development rights are determined? And in the town of Oregon, you're pretty fortunate because you've already figured that out. Right? People get one right for every 35 acres, and it's been that way since 1994. And a lot of communities, you know, outside of Dane County, that's one of the hardest things to do is to try and figure out how those rights are allocated. In the town of Oregon, you did that back in 1994 and have basically have that in place ever since. So that part's very consistent with what you've already been doing. So if I want to give away a development right under this policy, where can I do that? And so these are what we call sending areas. They're sending the developments away from those areas. And these would be all properties that are zoned in the county's FP 35 zoning district or natural resource conservancy districts within the farmland preservation area. Remember when I put that map up, I said we divided the town up into a bunch of different categories. One of them is called farmland preservation. And then one of the other colors, the sort of beige color of this map, is rural mixed use. And you can also use this program in those areas that are zone AT 35, which is agricultural transition, or NRC within the rural mixed use area. So both of those categories would be eligible for sending development rights away. Some of the things that need to happen first before someone can transfer their development right is they need a density study, which anyone who's developed in the town of Oregon is probably familiar with. That's a report that's produced by our department, our County Department of Planning and Development. We look at the history of the property, see how many rezones or land divisions have taken place since 1994, calculate how much is left, and say that's the development potential in the property. Every time we do one of those, we share it with the town clerk to make sure that our records and their records match up. And if there's any questions about that, we can resolve that so that we're all on the same page. But basically what that report says, it says, yeah, there's development rights on this property available. That could either be used on site or in this case, perhaps transferred somewhere else. So that's step one. The next consideration, so you have to have a development right to give. That's the first criteria you want to sign. The next criteria look at the soils on the property. We're looking at a county-specific soil assessment program that's focused on the types of crops that are grown in this area. That this would reduce, would contribute to preserving those large blocks of contiguous farmlands, natural resource land, or other open space. And then item 3 doesn't really apply in the town of Oregon, so that's an edit that we'll have to make. That is from language from the town of Cross Plain, where they wanted to use that criteria. So that's I apologize for that, and we'll correct that in the next draft. So that's sending areas. And then receiving areas. So if I want to buy a development right and I want to develop at a little more density than the town plan would otherwise allow for, these are some of the criteria. So it can't be in any of the zoning districts that we're using for sending areas. Have minimal impacts on some of those same kind of soils. So we want to go from the good farm soils to poor farms. That it would be clustered and adjacent to other existing development. And in the town of Oregon, we're proposing 1 development right sold in the sending area equals 1 development right allowed in the receiving area. There are some communities that have some ratios there, so you can get more in the receiving area, but certainly Oregon, I think the feeling was, especially since it's a new program, that we wanted to try 1-to-1 first, which is what most communities do. And then again, this is language that we will strike and edit. And then that it has to meet the siting criteria as for that planning area as identified in the town of Oregon Comprehensive. So all of those rural mixed use areas are going to have guidelines for what development should look like when it occurs. That would occur if it's new development or if it's happening previously. And then, so how do we make sure that there's a record that this transaction took place? How does the sending area, how do future buyers of the sending area, for example, know that one of those development rights is used? And there's 2 recorded documents that need to happen as part of this transaction. One is either a conservation easement or a deed restriction. These are both recorded documents that will show up in a title search. So when someone's buying the property, they'll have a full understanding of what they're buying. And basically it says that this property has given 1 development right away, and will identify where it went and how many rights were transferred. So if someone buys that land or does a density study report on that property in the future, we know that we have to subtract one or more development rights from that property. from the total. And so that can be either a conservation easement, which is a permanent document that has multiple holders, or a deed restriction, which is a little less durable document, but still effective for this kind of. Transfers are only permitted with the town of Oregon, so there's a number of communities that have TDR programs now. And under this policy, you couldn't transfer it out to say the town of Cross Plains or the town of Cottage Grove. And then the other document that's recorded are deed notices that basically get recorded on both the sending and the receiving parcel. And they just point to each other and say, this transaction happened, right? And so if people wonder, why is this person in the receiving area able to build an extra lot? There's a recorded document that says, yes, this was part of the TDR transaction. Here's where the sending development right came from. And, we reviewed it and it's consistent with the town plan. That's how that is. There's some requirements, in terms of that, what these documents have to look like. There's some definitions in the county code of what both deed restrictions and TDR conservation easements look like. So they have to be consistent with that. They have to talk about the number of rights transferred from each and to each receiving parcel, and then identify both those parcels, and then reference the easement or deed restriction document. Just again, so everybody can track this 10 years, 20 years in the future, people will know exactly what happened. So if you're in a receiving area and you've got the zoning that says that you're eligible as a receiving area, and someone wants to build, they've done all the zoning and land division work, and now they're ready to pull their zoning permits. That TDRR designation tells the folks at the zoning counter that, hey, you need to just double check this and make sure that all those other things are taken care of. That's what that is. So that they know, okay, you've got your easement. There's we've reviewed it and it's consistent with the plan. Just each of those three steps, that's probably, it's a pretty easy thing to do, because it's basically just checking with the town and my division, the planning division, to make sure that that transaction is completed as the plan says it should be. And that's it. I mean, that's TDR. I'm happy to take some questions.
Brian, we've been asking people to write their questions down by subject. So do we have any questions that the audience asked about TDR?
Well, not specifically, but I'll go through these, the people who did sign in, and I'll ask them if they do have questions. So, because they did sign in. So Kathy, Lisa, if you have questions in regard to
Well, I
this
think,
in general?
I think so. Forgive me, but this is all foreign language to me, so I'm very confused.
Sure.
And it has to do with this map. So I'm on Storytown Road. I'm on the corner of Storytown and Sun Valley Parkway. And it's right where D takes a very sharp turn,
Given it.
1385 Storytown.
We're going to look you up.
Good. I'm ready. And so my question is, it's a couple of them about this map. First of all, the green area is designated farmland, right?
Yeah, so the light green is that's farmland preservation.
Okay, and so I think the part that's in yellow there with the buildings on,
Mhm.
that's not farmland, that's a commercial business now.
So this isn't showing the zone. This is the plan. Right? So
Okay.
what the planned area means is that it's an area where the town is expecting that at least 80% of that area is going to stay in farmland preservation zoning. Not all of it, but at least 80%.
Of that big
Some
chunk.
of that everything colored in green on
Okay.
that map, right? There are some other areas in there that have been zoned something else over the years, so commercial or in some cases, what do you know what your zoning is?
I'm assuming residential.
Okay.
We have a house. So, I don't know.
That's the. Like, across.
Well, there's a bit, that's not our business. Yeah, we're on a different corner.
This one.
That's where I am, right there,
Okay,
yeah.
so you're not in a farmland preservation area under this
No.
plan. This would be in the rural mixed use. The farmland preservation area starts across the street here on the other side.
Right, which,
So this area is still, it's still limited to 1/35, but there've been, because there's been a lot of land divisions in that area over the years, and a lot of rezonings, these areas are not eligible for farmland preservation tax credits. You wouldn't be anyway, because you're not in a farmland preservation zone.
all right, yeah, and 1 in 35. I mean, there's more than 1 in 35.
There could be. That's
There is.
over time and that's one of the reasons, but so any new development in this area would have to meet that 1/35 standard. So but except unless there's a receipt, unless it's participating in PDR. Because these areas are eligible as receiving area. So you could, if someone bought a development right, say someone bought a development right out here under the transfer development rights program and brought it here and it met the siting criteria for the town, they could exceed that. Does
Okay,
that make sense?
it does. Yeah, I don't have to like it, but it makes sense. And so now my other question is the area outlined in pink.
Yeah.
Yeah, right in there. Now that is farmland right now.
Yep.
And what does that mean? I read the definition of it, but I just couldn't understand. it.
So-
What does that mean, the pink outline?
Back in 1994, the town was in the process of adopting exclusive agricultural zone. And there were some parcels that prior to that had already rezoned into another district. And then when the exclusive agricultural zoning went into effect, it had a provision that said, if you were in a lot that wasn't the right size for that zoning district, it said you could still redivide your property. So the people who had zoned ahead of time of that felt that they need, some of those folks felt that they needed to be treated the same way the people who got zoned into the new district were. Right? So what we're calling to sort of summarize, not a first version of the town plan, but in some later versions of the town plan, there was language written specifically for these parcels that would allow them to redivide. Right? That language then was taken out of later versions. So one of the questions that the Plan Commission is asking is we've got, so each of these pink areas was one of those areas that back in 1994 was in was then called the rural home zoning district. So the question is that the town is trying to find out is we have these two scenarios, right? Now, some of these areas like this one here was with RH back in 1994. It's already under the current plan in a traditional subdivision category where it could divide down to 2 acres. Theoretically, I mean, this one probably is not a good example because you probably can't get 2 driveways, right? But it was one that was already in that category. So the question that the town is trying to wrestle with right now, and the Plan Commission is looking for public input, is for these other ones that aren't already in this category where you could make 2-acre lots.
Right.
What should they be? Should they be rural mixed use? That's what scenario 1 would be, which would say you can't divide them unless you do TDR, right? That's scenario 1. Scenario 2 would say, nope, all of these can divide down to 2-acre lots without TDR.
Okay, I think my main question is, because the town and the county allowed a couple years ago that business to go to County Road D. And I was very opposed to that.
Okay.
And what my concern is this, that if this is gonna be divided up and rights are gonna be transferred or whatever, that commercial properties could end up on those corners, that there could be more commercial property out there. And I really want it to stay residential, farmland is great, but residential, I don't want commercial businesses coming out into that area. And I'm afraid because one has already been allowed, that sets a precedent that more will be. And I don't know if the town is looking to make that an industrial park area out there or not, but very opposed to that.
We're going to be talking more about commercial development a little bit later tonight. So, we can go through that then, and then if you have more questions.
Okay, thank you.
Anthony, did you have anything else? Anything
Yeah,
else
I'm
related to
gonna-
TDR?
Read Debbie Tofty, do you have anything for TDR?
Not with TDR.
Okay. Rich Striegel, anything
Yeah,
for
okay.
TDR?
I used to live in the town of Dunn. They would allow people to sell their developmental rights. And I believe they were purchased by the town.
Yes.
So the difference between this is this is gonna be sold to developers.
Can be sold, it's a private transaction between two.
So it's more likely that it's going to be more population, more expansion than what it would be in the town of Dunn.
That's correct. The town of Dunn, the town is basically taking those development rights off the market
Right.
by purchasing them and putting them putting the rights in public ownership, even though the land stays in private ownership. And basically taking them off the table. And so those development rights are no longer available in the town. This is different in that it's a one-for-one transfer. So for every development right that's taken away, there's another one that's allowed somewhere else.
Is there a thought that they may go the same route and just purchase the developmental rights and not sell them?
We haven't discussed that in plan commission. They're expensive. Purchase
Yeah.
development rights programs are. So it would require, a town of Dunn did, an additional tax levy. They went to referendum and got the tax levy to do that. They've also been able to match those funds with state and federal funds and some county funds to sort of expand the amount of money available. But we did not, during the plan commission meetings, discuss in great length the purchase of development.
But that would keep the expansion down.
It would reduce the overall development potential.
Thank you.
Yes.
I make a comment. Don't want in. I'm reclaiming. I think it would be to the detriment. Take away.
No, I mean, there's possibility, and this happens under, the existing system too. I mean, there's possibility that, a conservation-minded nonprofit might want to purchase those development rights and then not use them. Which happens now, with conservation, with those types like Nature Conservancy or, Parks or American Fireland Trust, National Heritage Land Trust, Groundswell, might purchase conservation easements on a property now with using their own dollars and just retire that right.
That's fine.
And Brian saying that had happened on the edge near the village. It's town property now, but it's by conservancy so there is town property that has done.
Stephanie, anything on?
Yes, Scott Craven, anything on TDR?
Not initially, but now, yes. Mainly because where you were a moment ago with your cursor,
Okay.
and you had to go up into the upper left a little bit more. So you had that L-shaped parcel
Here?
just to the right now. That
This
one,
one.
yeah.
Yep.
That, for example, was one of 5 subdivisions of the Heritage National Park. I own the one immediately to the west of that dog leg parcel. And for some reason on the map, I'm classified as rural residential. Those are all classified as mixed use, the rest of the parcels. And yet I have a farm number and I'm in the federal conservation reserve program. Plus, we were told that all 5 of those splits were the last 5 allowable subdivisions on their former 80 acres farm. And yet that was identified as having additional development rights, even though it's only 60 acres.
So under
So-
under scenario 2, it would have additional development rights, but under scenario 1, it would not. Except possibly through TD.
And the scenario of election has yet to be determined.
That's correct.
But I have a couple of other questions. for the director.
Okay, Diane.
Okay.
Yes, I have a question.
Diane, would you mind standing up? So I'm having trouble.
Okay,
hearing.
sorry. I was just wondering, so far, like, for people that have over 35 acres, but for people who are under 35 acres, how do they like find somebody to split? I mean, how do you go about even trying to figure out how to get a split if you wanna.
That's a good question. I mean, that's a very good question. What some towns have done, town of Cross Plains and town of Cottage Grove have basically pre-zoned eligible properties into the TDR ascending zoning district. So you could look at the zoning map and go, oh, look, I know they're eligible. And then, that would at least give you, some indication that, whether they're willing to sell to one of those rights is another question. Obviously, you'd have to negotiate that.
But
with
that
the
means like
individual.
you have to like call, like everybody or everybody you knows and try to figure out
I
who
mean-
has a split. It just seems very complicated that it doesn't really,
I mean,
it's like trying to do new tax laws or something. You have to like have the special rub your tummy and to try to figure all of this out when it could just be something very simple as you have to have so many builds in the area. And then, no matter what, and that it's like on a lottery kind of situation where, it would make it a whole lot easier, and you wouldn't have the large landowners getting to sell it and making a profit on it when there are others that don't have that kind of land that, what are they gonna sell the splits for? You say it's up to them. So is it 10,000? Is it 100,000? Is it, that's where it's not fair, to have that kind of a stipulation on it, is that my dad owned 165 acres. It's been split up between a lot of different things, over the years. We've been here forever. And now all of a sudden we're being, some of us that they can't build on that farmland. Because it's their portion of that farm was only 20 acres, and, I would love to give my sister but then I have children that I might want to have build on our 40 acres that we got. And, this just is to me that is so complicated that it's not that easy, this complicated.
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you suggesting lowering the density standard of the all? So instead of 1 per 35, it might be something like 1 per 25 or something like
Right,
that?
or 1 for 15, if that's what you needed to make the revenue.
Doing that town-wide
What?
and doing that town-wide?
Yeah, and making it like on, it could be, because you have not sold as many lots or builds as you need for the revenue that you want, correct?
There's two sides to any of that equation. So on the one hand, yes, there's more tax revenue from developed property in residential category than there is in farmland. There are also more cost of services. And so it's not necessarily a given that more houses necessarily mean a better financial picture for the town.
But in general, a residential area is going to bring in more revenue for the town.
But when the town of Dunn looked at that, before they adopted their purchase development rights program, they actually found the opposite. That the residential development cost more in services than they could get from revenue from property taxes.
But if you're already hooked up, and there's all right around you.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not costing the town really any more money for one more to go in.
It's not like-
Cluster of,
she's not putting in a new road. It's not a new road that's gonna go in. There's no, it's.
The other thing I will say is if you were talking about dropping the density below 1 per 35 across the entire township, that would mean that the areas that we're showing in green on the map could no longer be eligible for farmland preservation tax credits. Because the county farmland preservation plan says that if you're going to call this a farmland preservation area, you have to keep development at 1 per 35 or fewer. So that would mean that those farmers would lose that tax credit under that scenario.
so couldn't they keep theirs as what they wanted? It's, if they want to keep the 100 acres or 200 acres, that's on them. And it's for them, and
Then you're talking about a different change. So, that's why I asked if you were talking about doing this town-wide or category by category.
Well, it could be category by category. I mean, to me, people should be what, I mean, I understand that you don't want 100 buildings out there all at once. But if you want to raise the revenue and people are not using their leaflets or building where, you're building that revenue. And you have some people that do want to build, even though they don't have quite the acreage, that there would be a way that you could do that without having to sell splits or go through all of this rigmarole to have it done. I mean, this Jerry Jensen, has his lots and stuff that are back there. There's Glenview, that was all created in my lifetime. There's Bergamot, that was never there. That used to all be farmland. This just seems like is a lot of rigmarole and that it doesn't have to be that complicated of a thing. I mean, it shouldn't have to be that complicated where you have to go out, buy splits, get deeds done and restrictions and, I mean, that is.
The other thing I can tell you that just real quickly is that, some towns also have a list, they maintain a list where they reach out to people in the sending area. Would you be interested in selling a development right? They can update that on a regular basis. The towns that have done this for a while, I get it, it's new. But under almost all these circumstances, you're gonna have to do most of that work anyway, because you're gonna have to apply for a rezone, and you have to apply for a land division. The only thing that changes in that process is that in a TDR, you, instead of rezoning to one district, you have one district with an overlay. It's the same application, same time frame. The only other difference is that at the end of the process, there would be a conservation easement recorded along at the same time that you're recording, warranty deeds and certified survey maps to develop.
But you're selling you have to go out and buy.
Yeah, that's the one part that's different is you would have to find a right that's available. That's why I say, some towns have a registry where they say, to landowners.
But why is it necessary to have have a split sold when you could just change and say allow houses built this year? Everybody puts it in, they could put it on a lottery, or it could be first come, first serve, or however you want to do it. But it doesn't have to be this complicated.
My point is that I think communities have worked at this for a while, and after people get used to it, they find it's not as complicated as you.
Well, yeah, if you're a seller, you're sitting on a great deal, but if you're a buyer wanting to build on your property and you don't have the 35 acres, you're screwed.
I understand. Thank you.
True.
Dave Dillman, anything on TDR?
What's that?
Anything on TDR that you had a question?
Yeah, I have a question. On this map here, what criteria, I'm sure the county and the township put together on that map. Right?
Yep.
What criteria did you use for, legacy property? Farmland preservation?
Sure. So the farmland preservation are areas that, are out of long-term planning areas that are predominantly in agricultural use right now. They include some of the better productive soils in the town. One of the things that we did in trying to look at the map is I mentioned that the state requires that if you're going to call something a farmland preservation area, you have to keep 80% of that area in farmland. There was, over the years, there had been a lot of acreages that had been rezoned out of farmland preservation zoning in the town. And so part of what we did is try to identify some of those areas where that had already occurred and put them in the rural mixed use category, so they wouldn't count against that. Because the town, under the current map and the current planning and zoning map, the town is starting to bump up up to that 80% threshold. And so we took a look at both of those areas and tried to shuffle them around a little bit so that the farmland preservation area would have a little bit of buffer room so that people who are doing their 1-35 splits wouldn't jeopardize the tax credits for the whole town. The areas that we picked as rural mixed use are areas where there had been a lot of development in the past, where if there was ag fields, in many cases it's been land uses and probably all that viable. The traditional subdivision areas are under scenario 1 are essentially identical to the ones that are in current plan. We haven't changed those dramatically at all. Scenario 2 would add some areas to those some areas in yellow. So it's a little hard to see, but if you look at some of the pink ones. Yeah, so the legacy properties, those are all parcels that were rezoned to RH prior to 1994. So it's a set list of properties that were identified in 1994, and various versions of the town plan have been treated somewhat differently than other properties.
Okay, but you explain to me what legacy property is.
Legacy property is the property that was zoned in the rural homes zoning district prior to 1994.
But that doesn't tell me anything. What's the right? What right can they develop?
Well, at the moment, it depends what planning category they're in. So there are some that are in the traditional subdivision category, so they could.
I'll get right to the point. Across the street from me, it's a legacy property, but it's all marsh. And that's why I was wondering, why would that be there? What criteria? And just across the road at the same time. I'm just curious as to how they do that.
Okay, so in all of these cases, you know, in any of these cases, when we're talking about development potential, we're talking about potential.
Okay, they have to meet other criteria.
They would have to meet all the other siting criteria as well, and as well as county wetland and shoreline zoning ordinances. So if it's 100% wetland, yeah, they're probably not. Yeah, thank you.
Anything else?
That's all that I have in my file.
Okay, sir. Stand up.
Sure, Mike. The question is, like, sausage.
It is.
And what? But how many development rights that are in the township could be treated like that?
Yeah.
And secondly, just follow up on that. Second question I've got is, when a person wishes to purchase a right, can that person have that right until they find a piece of property?
So this is these are estimates. Currently in approximately farms. So that about the other areas we don't sites numbered all mixed use. It's traditional subdivision. These are that are 4 acres or larger that could redivide. The question in how many of those, you know, are laid out in such a way that they really could divide. We got some questions I know from email about did we'll go out and do site visits. No, we didn't do that, but I did take a GIS look at all of those parcels, measured their width, tried to figure out if there were, you know, covered in wetlands or things like that on them. And from that number came up with an estimate of about 44 of those could potentially redivide. And then we didn't talk much about the transitional area, but those are the areas immediately outside the village of Oregon. And there's about 27 development rights there. That one we actually did do density studies on because there was a few enough properties that we could use a lot of houses there. So that's scenario 1. Scenario 2, the big difference is that some of these properties that in scenario 1 are in rural mixed use are going in traditional subdivision. And that adds approximately about 100, a little over 100 additional development sites. So that's the main difference between those two scenarios.
Can I ask a question? Those are potential buildable sites, correct?
That's correct.
And how many have come knocking at the town of Oregon to want to build? I mean, you have an average of what? How many homes built average in the last couple of years, 5 years, 3,
Yeah, it's
about 3?
correct. It's not a very rapid growth.
And I think I read somewhere where you needed like 160 or something numbers thrown out at a certain meeting saying they needed these certain numbers by the year 2040. And so you would have to, if you're the numbers person, you would need 10 built approximately a year. And if people aren't coming to get that, how is this gonna get it to get you your numbers that you need?
So I want to clarify something. I mean, I know there's been some talk about the town's financial situation, and there's been some discussion about whether additional home construction would help that financial situation. This plan is not necessarily intended to do that. A plan that is intended, one way or another, the town needs to have a comprehensive plan in place. But the current plan is outdated and has, it's very much in need of an update. So.
Well, I think it would be brought up to take a look. Because otherwise it's people's taxes, or we need buildable sites. Please take this light when you guys are looking at the plan.
Exactly, and that's why the town plan commission proposed 2 different scenarios. They had a lot of discussion in plan commission about if we do need more development, where should it go? How could we create? There was a lot of discussion about how much do we need, how much is realistic. You can plan all you want, but if the market isn't there, they may not be realized.
Well, with the interest rates going higher than what it's been, you're really predicting less builds than what you're already doing.
Correct. So what the obligation of the town under state law is to make sure that you have enough development potential to meet projected growth. That's what the law requires that a plan do. Either scenario 1 or scenario 2 meets that test. Because in either case, there's enough development potential in the plan to more than accommodate the projected population growth of the town of Oregon.
And that's the strong word, potential.
That's correct.
My second question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Fisher. Yes. Oh. Were you done? Deb? Okay. Mr. Fisher, what's your follow-up question?
The follow-up question was, can a person purchase, hold, take the risk of finding?
Thank you. Yep. There is nothing in the draft plan or in the county ordinance that would prevent someone from doing that. Most, and it may also depend on how the town chooses to implement that. Most TDRs that occur in the county occur at the time where the seller and the buyer get together, application together at the same time. What you're proposing, basically banking a development right, is theoretically possible, but you would want to be awfully sure that whatever site you eventually use that development right on would meet the siting criteria, that the landowner wants to develop, that they would be, they would meet all the TDR receiving area criteria. So most of the transactions we see occur at the same time.
I'm sorry. We're talking about who's right?
So the question was, if let's say I'm a would-be developer and I buy a development right in a sending area, do I have to use it immediately? Or can I hang on to it and then find a property, a few months down the road or something like that, that might be suitable for a receiving area? And I think the answer is Theoretically, you could do that. You could hold on to it and then wait till the area was presented. But in practice, I haven't seen that happen.
And why do you think you have?
I think because, as I said, I think most TDRs are sort of, they're brought by the seller and the buyer to the town and the county at the same time. So most people aren't going to want to commit to purchasing a development right unless they're pretty certain that they can use it and use it.
Hi. And.
We all know who you are, but if,
Yeah.
so we can record it.
And Kleckner, my address is 545 County 8. And I've had conversations with, a number of young couples who would like and would love to buy property and build in the town of Oregon, but can't find anything that is affordable. That's, 35 acres is more than they can ever afford. But anyway, my main comment is just that having a list of people who, have development rights or wish to, sell them or buy development rights, I think would be a real benefit to the town.
Thank you.
Save people a lot of time hunting.
I do have another.
I see a
question.
half raised hand back there.
This
I would-
gentleman was waiting.
Go ahead.
first.
Okay, when you mentioned about any 4 acres that meets all the development rights can be rezoned into another right, what area is that in and what does that do in order to have those rights?
Sure. So that's in these areas. Let's look at scenario 1. Simpler. Any of these areas colored yellow could, if you've got more than 4 acres in, and I don't have it on this map, but we did have we did have those lots identified. But if they are larger than 4 acres, because the minimum lot size in that area is 2 acres, you could theoretically divide. The process for doing that would be the same as with any other land development. It would be a rezone petition and a land division. Either in most cases, a certified survey map. Both of which would be the rezone petition would be approved by the town and county board. And the certified survey map would be approved by the town board and the county planning.
Thank you.
This,
I was also, you said that they do this in Dunn, sell the splits.
In Dunn, they have a purchase of development rights program where the town takes development rights and buys them and takes them off the market.
Okay.
In town of Cross Plains and town of Cottage Grove, town of Roxbury, we have a map on our site that can show you where some of those other.
Can you give us an example of those rights are going for?
They're all based on appraised value. So, I mean, if typically done by appraisal. So the same way as you buy any real estate. So if you take the full purchase price of the property and you subtract the agricultural value from it, that's what's called the development value. And that's what you should expect to pay for a development. But they are also, because they're private transactions, some people may be very motivated sellers and they wish to sell them for less than market value.
So are you
But
saying that?
it's typically at appraised value for the development portion.
Okay, so are you saying that if somebody buys an acre of land or sells a split for an acre of land, then they can build on a acre of land? Is that what you're saying?
Well, keep in mind that the splits are allocated at 1 for 35. Right?
Okay.
So say I've got 6 splits, you could do an appraisal that would say, what is each of one of those splits worth, right? What is one home site on my property? And the home site would probably be, about 2 acres, 2 to 4 acres is what most typical development in the town under, the 1 for 35 happens. So You figure out what that value is, and then you subtract what the value of that property is if it just stays an ag land. It's what's gonna happen. So that 35 acres of the sending area would get an easement on it that's saying you can't use this for a residence anymore. And then in the receiving area, again, the area that would be built would be smaller. It would be, you know, a minimum of 2 acres. But, you know, the idea, that's part of the idea.
So it would be. All right, can you give me an example of like what the dollar amounts are on the 2 acre split or, you know, what they go for?
Do we have any real estate folks here? What are housing lots going for in the town of
I mean,
Warren?
they could go anywhere from 130 to, you know,
So, I mean, it's been a while since I've looked at what ag values are, but I think they're $6,000 to $7,000 an acre. 10, 12 now, okay, it's gone up quite a bit. So if you had a lot that was worth, let's say, 150,000, and then you subtract $10,000 an acre for the 35 acres underneath it, probably 100,000, something like that.
okay, so we're actually selling not a piece of paper, basically. For 100 some.
$100,000.
And yeah, whoever has a lot of splits out there, man, you guys just hit the
lottery.
jackpot.
Well, but those same people right now under the current plan could sell a lot for more money. So I mean, they're not getting more money under the TDR than they are under the current plan. Because they could sell a lot and it wouldn't be discounted by the existing ag value. They could sell it for more money.
All right, so if you want to build a house on your, say, 20 acre lot and you have to buy a split, you're gonna have to pay another $100,000 or, yeah, $100,000 on top of building a house. And where's the collateral there? I mean, what, who's gonna be able to get a loan for on a house when you have to pay $150,000 for a split or 100,000 even? I mean, I did mortgage lending for years and I'll tell you, there's no way that they would do that. I mean, that's just a piece of paper. That's not collateral.
Conservation easements have been around a long time. The real estate market knows how to evaluate them. They're a durable instrument, exactly like warranty deed. So what I'm saying is that there are, you know, that appraisers and real estate agents, lending agents, understand them. And there are lots of entities throughout the county that do exactly that do finance those, that do, you know, appraise and assess the value of those easements. It's a piece of paper, but so is a warranty deed.
Yeah, but a warranty deed, you're already got the land there. I mean, you're physically that and you're, you know.
If I buy an access easement across your property with a driveway, that right is every bit as durable as the right to own the property. It can't be removed unless that the holders of that easement all agree to relinquish it. So it's exactly like a warranty deed. That's exactly what a conservation is.
I just. Damn.
Jessica?
So is there, I mean, I think I know the answer, especially, maybe we don't have statistics about this, but do we know for TDR rights? Are just more often by individual residents in town or by developers?
Well, almost all the ones we've seen are one-to-one transactions between two landowners.
Between two landowners, so the residents and not.
We certainly haven't seen, you know, developers stockpiling them and like doing big subdivisions.
I would think that you would make a provision that, that would prevent that unless it's voted on, because I can see land developers grabbing up these splits and holding on to them until they can do whatever they want to with them. And then that'll leave even more people out. I can see that being a, something that can happen.
The town certainly could write language.
We've got a note on that. Thank you. Anybody else on TDR? Before I move on to our next subject.
Maybe it's, I don't know if it's TDR comment, but, it seems like there's a core question of whether we want to maintain the density or increase density. Right now, TDR, I guess you're talking about maintaining one and increasing density.
That's correct.
And it also I haven't been involved a whole lot, but I've listened a little bit online, and I feel like it sounds a little bleary on the financial side of whether residential makes money or doesn't make money. And I feel like maybe somebody needs to investigate it a little more. Sounds like the town of Dunn did.
That was a number of years ago.
Maybe you could use their calculations as one look. Maybe there's other groups that did. I've heard arguments that I think school, it's not just like plowing. It's not like there's a road and it's already there, so you're not gonna have any extra costs. There's like other services you have to buy into, right? Like fire protection and other things that the more residential units you have, the more you pay. Right? So I don't know, I think that's kind of core to the question here.
I appreciate that. I'm going to call upon the most knowledgeable person I am aware of in the township, our town clerk, to explain why this money thing is important and why it's very limited as to what we can do to increase it. That's Jennifer Handel.
So the town is under levy limits. So the state legislature established levy limits. So your levy is not allowed to change unless you have net new construction, which basically means you can only collect the same amount of money every single year. You can't raise it unless you have net new construction, which those are the levy limits we're working on. If you listen to the news, you hear a lot of people complaining. You see a lot of referendums. Village of Sherwood Hills just did one. And that's what we're running up against. So it's a little bit different than what Brian talks about because our levy limits are tied to net new construction. It's the only thing.
What does the increase in levy limit? So if you have net new construction and you're able to increase the levy limit, does that actually pay it off? Because maybe if it's possible, the increase costs actually meet the levy limit. So you aren't going to pay.
We don't, the town. Each one levy, it's only because levy, it brings us more revenue. So yes, we're not looking at the full big picture because school district is separate,
So-
county is separate.
Are you saying that the town of Dunn was
They
not
probably-
correct in their
they probably
assessment?
Done it prior to the levy limits. The levy limit laws have become very strict over the years. And no, the
I'm saying the town of Dunn's.
Oh, that was a number of years.
Yeah.
Much more than 4.
All right, what I feel like I hear is everybody's a little bleary on where the numbers lie with development. I don't know. I guess I haven't heard a great response on this is what we get.
The other thing I'll just say,
Per residential unit, per agricultural unit, per, I don't know.
the other thing I'll just say about the levy limits is those are likely to change this legislative session. There's negotiations. There's a couple of competing bills that would change the shared revenue formulas. And that will change the whole dynamic.
And how will this proceed? If we don't know the legislation will change and then affect
Well,
the decision that would affect the impact.
like I said, the purpose of this plan is not to, I mean, the plan is not designed, intended, and quite frankly, probably won't make a huge difference in the town's levy limit capacity. There's been some speculation that allowing for some additional development might increase some new construction, which would allow the town to do that. But the overall purpose of the plan is to guide land use and development in the town consistent with public opinion and surveys and public participation over the next 20 years. So levy limits or no levy limits, the town needs a comprehensive plan. And The one you currently have adopted hasn't kept pace with the nature of land use and development. So one way or another, I think everyone agrees the town needs a new comprehensive. Whether that addresses the levy limit issue or not, is almost the same.
Brian, can you just go back to the transitional number of splits?
This one?
Yeah. So just to kind of give, next month of July, we're gonna have the village in here, and they're gonna be doing an annexation next to the, Foxborough Golf Course. So some of those transitional splits are going to go away automatically because of annexation. So they're going to be, those 27 splits are in areas that are really planned for village growth. And so how that affects our levy is anything in there I have to decrease whenever we get an annexation, I have to decrease that. So that kind of another number.
Because it's the net increase that allows us to charge more for taxes, but if there's a net loss, we can we charge even less for
We
taxes.
can decrease it. We have, because it goes to the village.
To make sure there's some clarification on the taxes. What percentage of taxes that everybody pays is the town tax? Less than 10%?
Oh, you mean how much is the school district?
Well, you have the whole thing, you got the school district, vocational, state, county. There's a number of taxes on there. So we have our net.
Yeah, we're a very
It's less
small
than 10.
percentage, yeah.
It's less than 10%.
Most of it's the school district, or especially this,
I'm sorry?
most of it was the school district, especially this
That's right.
last year. Which most of you already
That's
know.
where the town had done, we had one of our former supervisors that got an analysis too, that by the time you add a new residence, all these other taxes pile on as well. And that there was we're losing, we're adding taxes to other citizens in town. So there's that opinion as well.
Any other questions on PDF?
One more, and then I think we should move.
Yes, sir,
on.
you have your hand up?
People wait.
Tell us who you are.
Dale Pava. Can parcel A sell to parcel B, parcel A turn around and buy from parcel M? You right.
No, because there would be.
Once it's sold, it's gone.
Yeah.
And you can't buy back.
Well, I mean, if it hasn't been used, you could theoretically buy it back, then you'd
No,
have to.
I'm not saying buying back from the same person.
Yeah.
From different.
Buy from somebody
Here's-
else.
Here's the
Right.
scenario, a person, but I'm 80 years old. I own a piece of property. I need some cash. I sell my. I pass away. I transfer my property to my heirs, a son. Now, he wants to build a house on that parcel. Can he go out and purchase a parcel from some other place that has a parcel to sell and then continue to build?
So when the sale is complete, will either be a conservation or a deed restriction on that property that will reduce the development potential of that property by however many rights are sold, right? Because that right has already been used, so the part of the purpose of the program is to say, you know, we want some areas to develop less and some areas to develop more. So I don't think there's gonna be an easy way to do that.
Okay, I just,
Yeah,
it's just a scenario.
The same way that if you sold a lot on your property, you couldn't realistically expect to get it back, right? I mean, if
A lot, what you mean?
well, if you drew up a CSM on property where you had the splits, right?
Yeah.
And you drew up a CSM and you rezoned it and you sold it to somebody. Pretty much gone, right? I mean, there might be a very
Well, I'm
unusual.
not changing the size of the piece of property.
No, I know, but you sold a lot, right? If you sold a lot off of the property.
No, I sold, right.
But they're the same thing.
Okay, that's what I want.
So
So.
selling a right is
An heir
exactly
could
what
not
selling.
come back and buy another right to put a piece of property.
No,
put a-
That's right. You'd want to think about that very carefully before you sold it.
Well, I mean, it's just a case situation, somebody needs some cash.
Right.
He got the cash, passed away, property's still within the family. And the family now wants to construct.
Yeah, I understand your point. That would not,
That's, oh, gone.
as plans written, that would.
Okay.
Versus selling it with the farmland preservation, that's a sitting area. But if they want to get it back on the road, they can farmland preservation.
That's
that'd
right,
be
that's
the
correct.
receiving area.
So the plan wouldn't allow that to happen.
What was that?
One clarification.
So the other issue is that the plan specifically states that you use areas that are in farmland preservation and in farmland preservation zoning as receiving area. That they have to be areas outside the farmland preservation areas. Because the purpose of the farmland preservation area is to keep as much land available for agriculture as possible. Yeah, that's correct.
Well, thank you very much for everyone who participated in the TDR discussion and wherever that led to. We're going to move on to a different topic that you may also be interested in. You're free to participate with us on. And that is agenda item number 6. Presentation regarding commercial development within our draft comprehensive plan. And Brian Standing will address that.
Okay. Thank you. So this is, I mentioned before that what the plan does, and this is what all land use and comprehensive plans do, is they divide the town up into a number of categories. And then there's different policies for each category. So this shows a summary of some of the key policy issues and some of the big differences between each of these areas. And when we get to commercial, I just wanted to go through this a little bit so you can see what some of the differences are. So the amount of commercial development is in farmland preservation. And that makes sense because we want to try and keep these areas available for agriculture for as long as possible, much land as possible available for agriculture. But it doesn't mean that there aren't types of commercial activities that occur. You've got a farmhouse there. There's a lot of home occupations that take place inside your home. Those are permitted uses under the county zoning ordinance. You don't even need a permit if they take place entirely inside your house. So lots of people have, computer businesses, online businesses these days. They don't have people coming in. They don't have clients, but they can run a business in the home. There's also opportunities for limited family businesses where you get a little bigger. Maybe you move into an accessory building. You've got a machine shed, or you're selling products on the produced on the farm or something like that. Those are options through conditional use permit. Do that in right in farmland preservation zone. There's also this zoning district called limited commercial. And this is really intended for contractor types of operations where there's a little bit of activity, say in the morning, someone loads up the truck, drives to a work site, stalls all day, comes back at night, unloads. Not a lot of activity in the buildings look a lot like farm buildings in many cases, pole barns, and the activity is pretty minimal. So those kinds of activities are fine in farmland preservation. And then we have a zoning district specifically for farm-related businesses. So agricultural implement dealers, veterinary clinics, things that are working with farmers and working with farm products. There's a zoning district specifically for that, and those are also farm and farmland.
What's your top would be included in that?
It could be, yes, if it's working with livestock. So that, yes, absolutely. Because again, the overall purpose of this district is to promote farming and farming activities. We're proposing in this draft, and it's a little different than the current plan, that in the farmland preservation area, if you're proposing one of these things that requires a rezone, LC or FPV, not these milder things up before that, but it would count as a split. It would count against that one. In the transitional area, very similar. Again, these are areas where ultimately the village is probably going to annex those. And so not a lot of commercial activity there. And then we get this rural mixed use, and now things start to open up a little bit for other types of commercial use. So certainly all those home occupations and limited family business, limited commercial, but now we're adding general commercial. And general commercial zoning is basically retail or commercial activity that takes place primarily indoors. There's limits on the size. So, we're not talking Walmart here. We're talking, sort of corner stores, those kinds of activities, retail, some kind of retail operation. I'll go through some more detail about what those zoning districts look like in a second. And then in certain conditions, you could allow in rural mixed use what a zoning district called rural industrial. And those are things like salvage yards, recycling centers, things that require a lot of room. Often they might have berms around. These aren't things that you're going to cite willy-nilly. There's a lot of citing criteria that go into whether or not they can be located there, but under certain conditions, they might be permissible in the rural mixed use district. We're proposing that, like the current plan, it does not count as a split. That's consistent with how the current plan treats commercial development. And then in traditional subdivision, it sort of narrows back down a little bit. And we're proposing that all those home occupations, limited family business, maybe some LT, and general commercial are okay, but certainly wouldn't want to see rural industrial in a 2-acre lot subdivision, right? That's not appropriate. So that would be allowed. So some other more detail on the policies for commercial development. These are some other standards. Couldn't result in environmental degradation, inappropriate traffic volume, or conflict with final operations. Boundaries only to that portion necessary for proposed use. Particularly important when it comes to conditional uses. If you're doing a conditional use in an accessory building, the conditional use permit boundary should really be just that building. Because you don't want to give people the impression that whatever that activity is, it's going to fill up a 20-acre plot. Because that's not what should be happening. Avoiding expenditure of public funds or municipal debt for construction and provision of improvements, things associated with commercial development. Avoid speculation. They must request a specific use. The county, when they updated its zoning ordinance in 2019, they spent a lot of time looking at the commercial zoning. And I think most people agree that we did a pretty good job of defining things like general commercial in a way so that there aren't a lot of really noxious uses in those districts. And so generally, in most cases, if one general commercial use is okay, another one should be pretty much the same. But if there are circumstances where there are area and other uses, Woodland Town still has the ability to restrict those uses in the individual zoning condition through a deed restriction.
It affects your property value.
Well, that's one of the things that the town needs to take into consideration when they review.
Last time.
And we could certainly add language about property values in particular through that. So that's commercial development in a nutshell. And again, you're looking at pretty limited commercial development in these areas that are light green and beige. Some degree of commercial development and traditional subdivision. Things like stores, retail, things that might serve people in that immediate housing area instead of having to drive a long ways away to get groceries or convenience items and things like that. Perhaps there's an opportunity there. And then a wider degree of commercial development possible in the rural mixed use, but again, they would have to meet siting criteria and compatibility with the joining. And the other thing is that each one of those applications for commercial would be an individual rezone. There would be notice to surrounding landowners, all landowners within 500 feet. This is just how county rezones work. And then they would have to go through town board and county board reviews for consistency with the company.
A person such as this lady is affected by proposed commercial development would have a hearing on this.
Yeah, she would get a notice. There would be public hearing.
And we did, and we were here, and yeah, and it didn't matter.
That's all I have. Okay.
Are there any questions specific to commercial that anybody in the audience would like to ask? Any questions for
Is
clarity, points to make?
is there a proposal here for commercial? I mean, he's just explaining what commercial is. Is there?
Brian?
on that?
The policies are, as I described them, so they're a little bit different depending on the planning. So that if a development proposal comes forward, that's what you would look to for guidance.
Is that not allowed right now, or is this a change or something?
Right now, the town has some guidelines for commercial. There was an attempt in the previous plan to try and map areas that might be suitable for commercial development, but to be honest, the map was pretty hard to interpret as to whether individual properties were eligible or not. So this provides a little more specificity than the current plan does, and provides some distinctions between some of the planning areas.
It's a slight change, but it's a little more specific than what we usually have. I think goes, I think.
I don't even know if there's anything goes. I think no one knows what goes. Was probably.
So we're trying to get more this time around. Yes, sir.
Jim, if a guy wanted to build an office building within the township, locations that would be more permissible?
Right? That's an office building though.
Yeah, let me somewhere else here. Oh, you had that link in you. Let me get the files. So let's take a look at what some of the zoning districts, the commercial zoning districts for the county are. And we'll get an idea, I think, some of what's. So an office building, it's gonna be, would have to be in general commercial, so in most cases require a rezone. Bigger.
It's on page 27.
Yeah, oh, there we go.
F3, page 27.
Yeah, so I just wanted to show what kinds of uses we're talking about in each of these districts. So in general commercial, office uses are permitted, contractors, undeveloped natural resource, agricultural, light industrial, daycare, government, institutional, religious or nonprofit community uses, indoor entertainment or assemblies, so that would be, a bar, a club, something like that, indoor sales, retail sales, indoor storage, repair. Yeah, most of these things are things that are occurring inside, indoors, so we're gonna have some degree of limit to impact on surrounding neighbors simply because there's not gonna be a lot of stuff happening outside. No livestock in general commercial, but other types of agricultural uses. And then there's a bunch of conditional uses. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about transient and tourist lodging?
Sure. So transient or tourist lodging is a fancy term for basically a bed and breakfast. So it's a building that's dedicated entirely for there's a definition in the ordinance that talks about the length of stay. It would be less than 30 days. I think it's no more than trying to remember how many rooms. It's a small number of rooms. and would function as basically a bed and breakfast.
So if my neighbor was doing that, would I have received a letter from the town that they got a permit to do that?
So there are two categories. There's what's called incidental room rental, which are rooms that are rented inside your primary residence. Up to 5, I think, rooms can be done without special permit.
Okay.
If it's more than 5, or if it's in a building that is not your primary residence, they need to apply for a conditional use permit. And you would be notified. Now, lots of people are doing Airbnb, and not everybody knows all the zoning. So we have had some issues with people doing this without CUP. And if there's complaints about that, we can ask them to go through the process.
Who do they complain to, Brian?
The zoning division, county zoning.
Yeah.
You go to the county, not the town.
That's correct, because it's a zoning issue.
Go to Brian. And you're gonna visit them, you're gonna send them a letter.
Yeah, we have inspectors, they'll go and inspect the site, see what's happening. If it looks like there's a zoning violation, they can issue citations and stop work orders. And then request that they, apply for a conditional use permit. Typically, enforcement is intended to bring about compliance, so it's not punitive. We don't assess fines,
No, right.
The idea is to try and bring it into compliance. So
Correct.
if they
Understood.
apply for the conditional use permit, they would also need to get approval from the Department of Public Health, because they do the public health does licensing of what are called short-term rentals under state statute. So and then, there'd be a public hearing, before the town planning commission and then in front of the county zoning commission.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So are there areas, I don't know if I've heard somebody ask this or not, I don't know if it's been answered. Commercial areas, will they be mapped? Are there areas that the planning commission has in mind that could be some light commercial areas that they're gonna direct it to?
Yeah, we discussed that in planning commission about whether they wanted to map particular areas of the town, or whether they wanted to consider them on a case-by-case basis. So the areas shown here in the sort of orange mixed use have the most potential for at least general commercial development. But the planning commission did not choose to map particular areas. So anywhere, as the plan is proposed right now, anywhere in the rural mixed use areas could be considered for up to general commercials.
So I could have another corner potentially that a business could go on right across from my house.
Yep, and you'd be notified and have an opportunity to speak up.
And it wouldn't matter how I felt about it, because
I can't speak
decisions
to
will
that.
be made, yeah.
I can't speak to that. So these are the kinds of uses that would be permitted. The few other things, when you start getting into things outdoors, that's where you're looking at conditional use permits, or things that have potential for, some nuisance potential, animal boarding, barking dogs, things like that. Where a conditional use permit, to make sure that it's suitable to the area and that there's conditions on it that would limit any of those nuisances. So that's general commercial. That's the other one that is probably going to be of some interest is rural industrial, which we talked about. That does include some potentially noxious uses, and so it has to be cited pretty carefully. Why is this? But let's try that. Most of the permitted uses are actually very similar to the limited commercial, the contractor types of operations we talked about before. The ones that start getting a little more intensive are all conditional uses. So there's and then again, the town can deed restrict to prohibit, future any of these future uses on any particular site as needed. So in some cases, there are some places in some of the existing rural mixed use areas that already are in rural industrial. The town's recycling center for one. I think there's a couple salvage yards that are already there, but it's not a lot of, we don't see a lot of RI zoning throughout the county because they're hard to place.
Just a real quick question. We have 6 different zones, correct? Or 6 different areas that we classified under the plan, correct?
Yes, more or less.
Approximately 6. Each of them have different requirements for commercial, correct?
That's right.
Okay, and I just want to get to your point. There's a whole 6, 7 acres in rural mixed use that Brian hasn't gone over. That has to be taken into consideration when a property next to you comes up. They're on page 27 of our draft plan. So if you want to take a look at those, they're a whole different.
Are they new or is it something that's always been?
Brian would have to answer.
Yeah. A lot of this is new.
It'll address some of your concerns a little bit more.
So if we're looking at rural mixed use, so when we talk about the goals and objectives. And then some of the policies, rural density applies. Except for rezone for commercial development. Development siting must be minimum of 2 acres net of right of way. There's some provisions in there to allow for some reconfiguring of lot lines for lots that have existed for a long time. They have to have driveway frontage, road frontage.
Got a question on that.
Yeah.
Each lot has to have 66 feet of frontage, or are people allowed to do shared driveways?
Yeah, that's going to vary by planning category. So in farmland preservation and transitional, road frontage is not required, would not be required under this plan. You could get away with an easement under certain conditions. There's standards that have to be met for maintenance and design and of those easement roads. In rural mixed use and traditional subdivisions, road access would be required.
So the planning commission will not allow new properties without at least 66 feet of frontage, is that correct?
In rural mixed use and traditional subdivisions.
Okay. But some of the properties in the plans or the scenarios don't have a whole lot of frontage on roads, yet they show splits or.
Yeah, in that development, this chart, I tried to take that into account. So this estimate of what that development potential is. I tried to take a look at whether they really were developable or not. So the total number of, lots that, for example, in traditional subdivision that are over 4 acres is more than 44. We knocked a bunch of that out of this estimate because it's not practical to divide them. And I think the same is true with the rural mixed use category. Yes. Driveways have to comply with the town driveway ordinance using erosion control measures. And then additional standards may be required for certain types of development, commercial development. Site plans containing all information. And then we talk about the types of commercial development that would be allowed here. So limited to services for local residents. They have to request a specific use. They can be restricted to limit the use that would be allowed on that property. Town may set additional limits on the number of employees, hours of operation, number or size of buildings, types of products or services, outdoor activities as needed to meet the goals and objectives of the plan. Limited to that portion of the land necessary to propose commercial use. Buildings for commercial use limited to 2.5 stories and 35 feet in height, whichever is left. So your office building example isn't going to work in the rural mixed use district, at least not bigger than 2.5 stories. Not more than 10,000 square feet of floor area, unless the town planning commission and town board find it's in the public interest to allow that. If it's a use that requires public sewer or water, intensive police or fire protection, or other public services, basically send them to the village. where they have an urban services and are able to deal with that. They can also require, the plan commission or town board can require vegetative screening, noise limits, dust or pollution controls, and or increased setbacks for commercial uses to minimize those impacts. And then similar types of conditions for the rural industrial development, including deed restrictions, berms, vegetative screening, noise limits, limits on hours of operation, compliance with pollution control regulations, imposing environmental and safety monitoring, and then conditional use permits also, particularly in the rural industrial area, would have expiration dates. So that if someone's not living up to those, they would have to reapply and go through a second public hearing if they're not living up to them.
Anybody else have any, or are you still going, Brian? Is it, okay, anybody have any questions about what we're looking into in terms of commercial zoning and development in the township as part of our comprehensive plan? Anything to do with commercial? Any questions? Brian and Stephanie, would you clarify for the audience that if they do have questions that occur to them later or want to get answers to, can they submit those to us?
Absolutely. So we have an email address set up specifically for so if you have email on your computer, which I don't believe this computer has, and you click this link, it will take you directly to an email address. Just need something I can paste into. Okay,
Right, I'm not making it very easy.
I know. Well, because this, for most websites, this would, for most browsers, it would open up your email address, but this doesn't have email. So this is the email address, OregonTownPlan@countyofdane.com. That email goes to myself, Stephanie, Jennifer, and Tim. And we're doing our best to try and respond to those comments as quickly as possible. We got about, I don't know, 6 or 7 prior to this meeting, and I was able to respond to all of them.
Yeah, appreciate that. So if you have a question relating to the plan, this is dedicated to that process, so I encourage you to use it. You will get our attention if you write to that email address. That has to go with our plan. Yes.
Just got one more question about the clarification. So the handout and I guess most of the information shows there's 2 scenarios. But what I'm hearing is scenario 1 is actually the proposal. Or scenario 2 is the proposal and scenario 1 is just the current situation. Is that the case?
So scenario 1 is more similar to the currently adopted plan. Scenario 2 is a departure.
So there's 2 options. And then you're looking for residents to provide feedback, or is there a push from the planning commission on one of them?
We are not pushing.
Okay.
We want to know what you think. We want to know what you think and why you think it.
Can I ask one quick question? Sorry, I don't want to take too much time. Under scenario 1, scenario 2, the things that you have heard me speak about tonight, is there one that would be more beneficial to us living on that corner? To not have commercial development there?
If
Or
your
doesn't it
concern
matter?
is primarily about commercial development, then scenario 1 and scenario 2 treat commercial development pretty much the same. The big difference between scenario 2 and scenario 1 is that under scenario 2, more of these, what have been identified as legacy parcels, are classified in a category that would allow them to redivide. That's really the only difference between the 2 scenarios.
On that map, when you just select the legacy sites, you can mark everything off except for the legacy sites. It looks to me like it reflects subdivisions only. Is that correct?
These were, again, these were lots that were divided before the town adopted exclusive agricultural zoning in 1994. So whether they were divided by subdivision plat or certified survey map, I think in some cases, this was probably a plat and then got classified as traditional subdivision. Some of these were probably done by certified survey map. So they all occurred prior to 1990.
I was having a hard time, I was looking at scenario 1 and scenario 2, and to try to see a change as to relative to the legacy sites. And I can't see any change.
Sure.
I just stare at it and
So look at this area here, for example, right? So under scenario 2, you see these legacy parcels are colored yellow. That means they're a traditional subdivision with a 2-acre minimum lot size. In scenario 1, classified as rural mixed use, they cannot redivide. Because it's 35 acres, 1 to 35 acres. So if you look. And then, so this is scenario 1 you're looking at now. That's scenario 2.
so under scenario 2, that includes the entire. Could you bring up scenario 2 again? Does that include the entire orange area?
These orange areas stay the same. Doesn't matter whether they're scenario 1 or scenario 2. These lots under scenario 2 are classified such that they could redivide.
Okay, well, let's remove scenario 2. And it still shows those two sections are still considered to be legacy sites.
Yes, the legacy parcels don't change because they were created in 1994 and haven't changed. So, I mean, you can turn them on. I mean, they're basically just for reference.
So scenario 1, those legacy sites can be divided.
Scenario 1, they cannot be divided. Scenario 2, they could.
Scenario 2. I wasn't understanding it now.
Okay. Turn up.
Thanks.
So did you try to work that map yourself at home?
Oh, hours.
Yeah, me too. Once you get it, it's really handy. It's pretty slick.
It is, and then I tried to print it out so we could talk about it. Doesn't work very good with colors. Throwing all the data down.
Okay, good to know.
Since you got the map up, could you show me where Swan Pond is on there?
Hang on a second. I can get rid of this one. Thank you. So I'm sorry, what was the question? What did you want to find?
Swan Pond is the bend in Fish Hatchery Road.
County Road D,
It's in the.
Here?
where the bike path is.
You have to direct me here. So here's Fish Hatchery, this one? Further north?
Right there. Okay, right there. Is that it? Yeah.
Up. Okay. Yep, so this is. Choose.
So that is Swan Pond. Or can you find an address? Can you find the address for me?
Sure, give me an address.
1617 County Road D.
There. This is the town line here.
That's the line of going from Pittsburgh to us, right?
Yeah.
So our farm is all in that yellow color, pink, whatever that is.
So that's here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's rural mixed use. You know what your zoning is?
No, not off the top of my head.
I have to look that up too. If you want it.
Okay.
All right. Your zoning's RM8, which is not farmland preservation, which is probably why we put it in rural mixed use. Again, part of the goal was to try and reduce the amount of non-farmland preservation zoning in the farmland preservation areas, because the state wants us to keep at least 80% of these areas in green and farmland preservation zoning. Since that's an 8-acre lot and it's in non-farmland preservation zoning, it works better for the farmland preservation program if that's in a different planning category.
But all the rest of the land there is all green and that's in our farm protection, right?
That's correct.
That's what I'm.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. You have a question?
In the chats on Zoom, we have a question and we have it printed out.
So but the question is, this was on TDR, seems the new comprehensive plan is letting developers decide where to build rather than the city planning it. I agree on an increased tax basis, but it seems development should happen near the city rather than rural land. It looks like a way to bypass the city's current development process. If development rights are sold and the comprehensive plan changes, does that negate the supposed to be? Yeah, something to comment.
I do have a quick question. So as this comprehensive plan were to be approved, if changes that were, if any problems identified or additions needed thought to be happen, would that be like on an annual basis, or is that something that could be brought up at any point?
The town board has discretion to, town board and plan commission have discretion to amend the plan at any time.
Don't have to wait a whole year.
The only requirement is that you have to have a public hearing and you have to give a 60-day public notice in advance of the hearing.
Sir?
Yeah, Brian, you mentioned that the legacy parcels, scenario 2 can be subdivided. And then into how many parcels?
Whatever they can do with a 2-acre minimum lot size.
All right.
Does that wrap it up for you, Brian?
That's all I've got.
We
Okay.
got chats quick and then.
Anything else in the chats? We've had people watching on Zoom, so occasionally questions come in.
Yeah, we were trying to do. Okay.
You read that one?
Yep, we read that one, so I think that's it.
Okay. All right, folks, that concludes our discussion of the commercial development and the comprehensive plan. We're gonna go on to our next item of business. You're welcome to stay or leave your sit bit. Thank you for your input. Don't forget where that web, where that email address is, if you have any follow-up questions that occur to you or. Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item number 7 on our agenda, our discussion or recommendation regarding 2003 amendment to chapter 10 of the Dane County Code. And you want to salvage operations. Here was this. We have provided this member of the commission with a copy of the proposed amendments regarding, we can't call them junkyards anymore, they're salvage operations. Is there any? Sir, are you here?
No, not.
Anybody else? Okay, I don't want to overlook anybody who's here to speak on that particular issue.
Yeah, I feel like.
Anybody got any comments before we vote on whether to recommend or approve the amendment that Dane County would like to make?
Is he not there? On Friday night. On Oregon, that falls under pretty good for a sick Friday. Yeah, we do bake coffee. On the wheel all night. Does 108 on the big things. We do them both Friday, 80 meals a day on Friday night. It's going well. One good, one good. Got them, and we saw a lot here. Great people.
And I.
250 pounds of things, right? Yeah, keep that stuff. We're a little town of Brooklyn, that's a lot of.
Jade on his humble.
Yeah, we take it. We
I
take a lot.
found out through the clerk's office, our clerk's office, that there is one property that
That's why the burgers are
Green
good.
County has a.
The only one that they identify as that qualifies as this, yeah.
Otherwise, the county licenses.
And we got about
Such operators and enforces the
Right.
rules. So the county's asking us to,
blowing us a little bit.
asking the town board to express an opinion on whether they.
I was surprised that there's
Changes, which seem pretty just technical, the other one was.
Yeah, it seems that way. You know, when they go through and they
I'm always there
update
Friday
things
night.
and change things, revamp things, maybe not for one specific reason, but just because it's a necessary process, kind of like what we're going through.
So we do in the town have one.
Yes.
One license, one license.
Salvage operation yard. And the license is going to. Has that person been notified of these changes?
I don't know that the license is gonna. If that's, I didn't read that that's what that said.
That way?
Yeah.
I should have probably, I didn't push myself very hard.
So they're, can't say, well, either way, they're licensed. No. Yeah, they've been licensed for that, but it's an operation that's in. The town, and I guess.
I wasn't gonna do this, but I just thought. Hey, Rudy. They say.
But it seems like a lot of technical changes rather than substantive change.
That's the way I got it.
Is there? I guess I'm always a little bit leery about if it's going to be a.
I tried for the plan.
Somebody where they notify that this is going to happen.
I wish we could have
It
got.
looks to me as if it's gonna be less restrictive on that operator.
The one
gonna get you.
property that that applies to.
Eliminating stuff.
Yeah, I think the main thing here is says in review, we have determined that this license is unnecessary to enforce compliance with zoning requirements. So they're not giving up anything by not having a license.
There's a summary of, there was on page 5 of what we got today. And bullet points, 4 things. 4 items that are. The major amendments to.
You're gonna try, I said, I got. I want to put up my.
Attachments. See, it's the town clerks, and it's a summary. Well, additional.
Yes.
It just seems like it's more. Technical, or just. Revising some terms and doing anything.
Is the first bullet point? So now, but forgive me for asking you a question. Does anybody have? I mean, whether this would require somebody to get a CUP, who didn't have one before? That's the only thing I see in that list that.
I only think what it needs to simply, I can put all the crap in my front yard I want, but I'm not a salvage yard. If somebody wants to operate a business as a salvage yard, I think that's what they have to apply for. It's more of a business, but it's not so much somebody. Who could have 1967 cost just in the front yard.
These are.
I mean, that's a different picture we're working on. I thought it's a whole different scenario.
That's different, that's different.
It is, yep.
This is the actual.
This is completely separate than that.
But we say it's- no, I know, I'm just wondering about a certain person. Who's kind of a neighbor when she moved, and I just. And if he doesn't need to get a CUP or if he's not. Cool, so. I feel bad.
Well, he's being regulated by somebody other than
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does look like there's an inspection language added in Article 4, Section C. That's not anything the town would be responsible for.
Right, that's handled
It's
by
just the county.
Is it red or?
It's red.
very last round.
Addition, red.
Middle,
Line
middle of
115.
page 9, yeah.
That's Lewis. Way beyond me. See, it's right.
Yeah.
Annual inspection by zoning administrator, which is a county position.
So it doesn't change our responsibilities at all. Did you say Article 3, Section 4?
Oh, line 115 is easier.
Article 4.
Thank you.
Article
I'm
4.
in the totally wrong place. Said 115. Okay, thank you.
Robert's rules of order, or we can. I'd like to hear if anybody's opposed to this. Has anybody got an opposition to it that they'd like to explore? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion for make a recommendation to the town board. Which is what we're doing. We're just making a recommendation to the town board, whether the town board should take any option or approval of this. To let
They
the
ask
county know.
For approval or comment?
Basically, if there is, the county does this portion. And if there's anything like what you guys had brought up that would trigger a response from the town, they want to know about it. Well, what it usually happens in this situation is you would recommend approval or recommend Dane County approval to the town board, and then the town board would do the final. Or you would note your concerns, and then we would take that to Dane County.
Because you fill out a form, inform Dane County of what our opinion is.
Yes, yeah, that way they can use it in the rest of their process as well.
All right. Anybody have any comment before we make a recommendation to the town board about accepting? No. I'll entertain a motion to either approve or not recommend approval. They want to know our opinion.
Make a motion, we recommend to the town board our approval of the changes made to the new chapter 10 of Dane County ordinances regarding salvage operation.
Very good. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, it's been moved and seconded. We recommend approval to the town board. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, and we're all set. And Stephanie will take care of the paperwork now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Item number 8 on the agenda is communications, and I see that we have an audience remaining. Is there anyone that I'm going a little beyond the agenda to invite comment, but is there anything to be said out there? Thank you for bringing such well-behaved children. Oh, they're the best. I was thinking the same. Thank you, kids.
Hey, Kim,
Yep.
I just wanted to bring something up. So Dane County zoning takes care of all of the zoning inspections for the town. Since we have some new plan commission members, they were gonna come in and do a presentation on what exactly they do. And it would really be in par with kind of this ordinance that we're passing, because they're the ones that go on and inspect and would fine or cite anybody. So what I was hoping to do was to try to maybe push that off till fall. But is there a certain date that you guys would like to hear a presentation like that? I thought we'd get through the comprehensive plan. Would September be about a time you guys would like? Sean Whittish is the zoning inspector for the town of Oregon, the Dane County zoning inspector. He would probably come with Roger Lane, and Roger Lane was the one who talked about CUPs last time. So fall sound good to everybody, or would you like it sooner?
I can wait till fall. Anybody else care?
Okay, and so we'll send
Just
out some
schedule that for-
information.
Yeah, whatever you think is good for scheduling for them.
Yeah, kind of gets us out of the comp plan. We're thinking September comp plan. So, okay,
And this would be a presentation. They're just going to educate us.
kind of like the CUP, yeah,
Okay.
about what they do, how they go out in the zone. So if someone's building a new house, they would come out and make sure they're so far off the lot line. Or if it's this junk ordinance and they've got a complaint, they would go out and inspect that. They're gonna talk about basically what their job is and how they
Good, I'd really like to hear that.
Inspect,
myself.
enforce.
Yeah, inspect, enforce, all the other things that we don't really see here, but that they do as part of their ordinance, the Dane County ordinance.
All right. That brings us to the end of our agenda, except for the one, the only Arlen Kai. Any report that you'd like to tell us about from the town board?
Well, I actually found that there was another one down in Texas, but I've never met him.
The other Arlen Kai,
Yeah,
but he's on death row, isn't he? Where you are?
distant cousin.
Is it with an AN or an EN?
It's an A.
Awesome.
Would you believe? Anyway, we have, May is the usual, end of terms for plan commission members. We have 2 plan commission members that their terms are expiring. Dave and Sharon. And there's going to be, questions of you as to, are you interested in serving another term? I am not sure, I cannot say for sure what the board is going to do. It's a new board. Do they want to take interview for the positions or not? The first step is, are you retiring or wishing to continue?
The length of the term is how long now?
3 years. Or
Until you.
Been on more than multiple times, it's 3 years. This is kind of new.
well, something to think about. They had the term limit, the terms of 3-year terms has been in there. It's just never been observed.
So was this brought up as a discussion point at the last board meeting?
No, this has been brought up,
So why are you bringing? it?
this brought it up 2 years ago as to just what were the terms. And when Andy Boomstrom resigned, it begged the question, it was looking
We
again
reviewed
at
all
the
its
question, so it
terms.
was. I say this came up a couple of years ago. See, when we had new members being interviewed and somebody, so what terms were they filling? And when did they start? When did they end? Those questions came up, like I say, some time ago.
So are you expecting an answer tonight? Should they just get in touch with you and like?
I think that could, Dave's got the deer in the headlights.
It's a different look, Arlen. You can take it how you want it.
It is, like I say, it's procedures that were there all along. They just were never implemented. And so now, this is the time, if you want to think about it.
When's my due date?
Pardon?
When's my due date? You gotta know by?
I don't mind. That's the town board's request, not mine.
Usually it was a term.
So when I usually
June is
did
the
it,
term.
I always asked in May and then the board would reappoint in June. That's how we did it in the past.
Okay.
That this would kind of be following that same thing, that the board would reappoint in June. Again, I don't know
Okay,
because
so we're dealing with kind of a tradition that it's after the spring elections.
yes.
The summers after the spring election, that when new board members come on board, that's sort of this, do we have anything in our ordinance as to official start and stop of a term?
I
As
think
far
it's
as
June.
June,
I think that's the ordinance.
yes, to the end of June. Okay. Sort of hard to, there's also, in my mind, you have, we're getting close to the finish line on comprehensive plan. Which I'm sure you'd like to be seeing through.
I'd sure miss one if they jump ship now.
So there's also, there's ways that some terms do not necessarily have to start immediately. Or think about it.
Correct.
As to
People
what
can
what you
retire
gonna
in the
do.
middle of
Sharon,
their
you
term.
threatened some time ago, I'm out
We're
of here,
not.
but you've been more engaged of late.
And I'll tell you why.
Yes.
When I came on board, we were in the middle, the plan commission was in the middle of doing the comprehensive plan. And it was awful. I will not put anyone else through coming in the middle of putting together a comprehensive plan. It isn't fair to that person because they don't know the history. They're bombarded with questions that they can't answer because they didn't put it together. And it's very hard to interpret and understand and explain to somebody if you haven't been through the process. And that's probably the only reason that I will stay on.
Okay, so think about it. Sharon is looking, if she would like to stay on, so we
Unless I
have
die tomorrow.
continuity. Pardon?
Unless I die tomorrow. If I do,
Oh, we all could be hit by an 18-wheeler as we leave here. So we'll take that chance and look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
Did you have any other town board to report?
Not really, no.
All right. Anybody else on the commission have anything to add?
I have a question.
Sharon Christians.
Some time ago, we requested some direction from the town board. And I don't feel like we've ever gotten it.
On what subject?
So how are we supposed to continue to finalize this plan when we don't know what the town board is looking for?
Are you referring to scenario 1 or scenario 2?
I am, that's part of
Okay,
it.
that was left. That was pushed off by the members, pushed off by the members that were leaving, saying, new board is coming on. Have them make look at it and make the recommendation.
Okay, so we haven't had a recommendation
We
yet
have-
from either one.
Nope, not yet.
So how are we supposed to know how to continue? We're supposed to be on the final lap here, getting things ready to put to the public. And how can we do that when we don't know what direction the town board wants us to take?
What we have done is that we have recommended scenario 1 as presented in the plan for our draft of October 18th, 2022. That is our recommendation, and that is what the board either needs to finalize or add, send back to us to add scenario 2.
Is the board aware of scenario 2? Is the board aware of scenario 2?
Yes.
Did you explain that to
Yes,
them?
yes. They've had that.
Has there been
Had
agenda
that-
items on the board to discuss this?
Yes.
I was at the last board meeting. I don't recall. it
Oh,
being
not the
discussed.
last board meeting, but before that, there was.
Is it on an upcoming agenda item to get it finalized? Clarified direction?
Let's make sure that that is.
I think the schedule kind of is that after the 2 public input sessions, July, you guys would come together, take all the public comment input into consideration, make any changes you wanted based on that comment, and then you would recommend it, and then the board would take that into consideration at the August meeting. And at the August meeting, they would issue that 30-day notice at that time for the public hearing. I don't know if you remember Brian Standing talked about there has to be a 30-day
Right.
notice, yeah. So I think that was, we tried, Tim and I sat down and we tried to map out a schedule of how we could get this accomplished and have dates on the calendar that we haven't had before. So part of it was getting these public input sessions to have people listen, to have everyone listen. Most of the board members are attending via Zoom, you know, ones here, so that everyone could hear these comments. And then, like I said, in July, you guys might have different thoughts of things based on the comments you've heard. And maybe your recommendation might change, maybe it might stay the same. Doesn't matter, and then that would go to the board. What the idea?
Can I ask a question? I was, I wasn't here yet when you guys voted to sort of go with the October draft, so. But based on what you're saying, it sounds like we have an opportunity or time to tweak before September's final vote. So I wonder, has there been consideration of a process? And for example, the suggestion came up, Brian mentioned that how a commercial development might affect property values in that area. He said that would be language that we would need to add to somewhere in the comprehensive plan as something to consider in that process. So if we wanted to add that, would we at some point have a discussion around like what we've all gleaned from these meetings and what we might suggest doing in terms of tweaks? I noted, I saw that you were writing that down at the time too.
In terms of public meetings law and the agenda, our agenda is being written, our agendas are being written with having in mind that we might have a discussion tonight. We're not limited, we are permitted by the public meetings law to have such a discussion tonight. I expect that next month's monthly meeting will also have a wording similar to today's, which is presentation and public input.
Yes.
Discussion someplace in here. So discussion and possible recommendations, that's the kind of language that we're looking for.
Correct, but what I think you're asking is, will there be an opportunity to add language if you see fit?
Well, as somebody who's new and wasn't part of the drafting process, I'm wondering if there is an appropriate time and place to suggest any additional.
Yeah, and I think when Jennifer was like going through the schedule, that would happen after our public input sessions, which would be in July. So July is like your month where you probably will need to have more than just your July meeting and possibly some of these work sessions to iron out those type of kinks.
So we should be sort of like keeping notes on those.
Absolutely.
I would absolutely, yes.
Suggest.
Tuesday, July 18, the notes I have made to myself after discussing the timing with the clerks is wrap up of final draft plan for presentation to the town board.
Correct, and if you need more time than just that, then you would say, like, if there's tons of things. I mean. We've kind of recommended this draft already, so I would hope that there's not tons of things, because.
Brian has made the adjustments based on our request.
Yes, exactly, but if there's things very specifically that come from these input sessions, that's why we're doing them, and then. That you do decide that you want to edit, change, or add, that would be something that you would try and fit in July, which you would fit in July, however it may be. You have to have 3 meetings, you might have to have 3 meetings. But you get, that's kind of the schedule that we're
What
on.
are you saying? That you have to have what?
If you have to have 3 meetings, you gotta have 3 meetings. Like, you have to, that's the schedule that we're on right now.
And I think that the goal is that if there's really major rewrites, you would keep that for an amendment. So if you identify something that you're gonna wanna do, like Brian said, we really want to get it updated because it's so outdated. So there might be things like density or other things you're going to put on and you're going to say, hey, that's going to come in an amendment. We're looking at that more. And I think that's what this plan commission did, was saying, hey, we're going to pass this because this is to the finish line. And if we have to look at other aspects, we'll take some more time and do that at that time.
And I anticipate that Tuesday, July 18, we will have a thorough discussion as we want. Our final recommendation to the town. And if we're going to recommend scenario 1 or scenario 2, that's the time to vote on that. And then the town board can decide whether they want to accept their recommendation. or not. Okay,
We have already made the recommendation to the board for scenario 1.
we have,
And we have voted on
we can
that.
still change our mind because the final wrap up is.
If there's a change of heart, July or continue, July is the date.
And I think it's important for the public to know that we still have an open mind on this, that their comments have not been wasted.
I think that is important. And then we'll have a final public hearing then in September. So there's going to be an actual public hearing in September. So you'll have 2 public input dates, then you're going to have the actual public hearing. So there's going to be at least 3 opportunities for comments on the plan from the public.
Is that the September 1 is before the town board?
Yes.
Or before this commission?
It will be before both. It's going to be more of a joint meeting.
It'll be a
Yeah,
joint board.
in September.
Joint meeting Tuesday, September 19th. Yep.
September 19th?
Right, Jennifer?
Yeah, that was the date that we really wanted to pick dates and try to stick to the calendar schedule as much as possible. Because this has taken so long.
Folks feel Brian Standing, do you agree with me that Brian Standing did a good job addressing everybody?
Very much so.
We've done really well at answering online questions. for everyone. Very excellent, very patient.
Smart move to have him here, you guys. Thank you for arranging for him. Okay, anything further before I ask for the all important motion to adjourn? There being no further business, may I have a motion?
I make a motion.
All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Are you foolish enough to disagree? We are adjourned.
Always have.
Yep.
That's my default if I don't have. It's a very safe default.